Guys, welcome back to Medical Coding with Blue. Today we're talking about one of my favorite subjects, which is fractures. Okay, we're only going to talk about the groundwork of fractures, what type of fracture there are, what kind of fractures there are, and of course we're going to be talking about that 7-digit character. Okay, all injury codes, fracture codes, they have this 7-digit character of A for active treatment, D for subsequent treatment, or S for sequela. Okay, you have to understand what each one of those means, okay? And I'm going to give you a good example of each of those, all right? So let's say for example, a patient fractures their wrist, okay? They go to the ER and the doctor does their x-ray and says, oh yeah, you fractured your wrist. We're going to go ahead and set you in a cast, and we're going to send you on over to ortho for follow-up, okay? So they set the patient in a cast, and everything's good to go. This is an example of A, okay? Obviously, this is very straightforward. This is the first time this is actively being treated because they set the cast. They set the fracture, okay? So they go on over to ortho for their follow-up appointment, and ortho does their x-ray, and they said, oh yeah, everything's good to go here. We're not going to change anything. The bone is still set, and everything looks good. Follow up later on, okay? This is an example of subsequent, so it would be D for their first visit. So why is this? This is the first time that orthopedic doctor has seen that patient. Why are they getting a subsequent visit? They're getting a subsequent visit because they've already had their active treatment in the ER. Everything is good to go. The provider is not changing anything. You know, the bone is still set. There's no need to redo the cast or anything or to reset the bone. So everything's good to go. This is subsequent because in their treatment, they're not being actively treated. They're in the subsequent phase, okay? They're in the healing part now because obviously nothing had to be done to this, okay? It's healing nicely, okay? So that's an example of that. So let's take this same patient who was in the ER, who had the x-ray and it was set, and they said, okay, follow up with orthopedics. So the patient gets over to orthopedics, they have their x-ray done, and then orthopedics says, uh-oh, the bone slipped out of place. We need to set this bone again. So the patient has to go in and get the bone set again and recast it and everything. This is an example of active treatment. Why? Because the bone got out of place and they had to be set again. So that's something to keep in mind. That is an example of active treatment because they're not in the healing phase yet. They're still being actively treated for this fracture, okay? That is when orthopedics would get an A as its 7th-digit character, okay? Because they are being actively treated, okay? So what does sequela mean now? Sequela can occur at any time, okay? So it can be 25 years ago and they could have a sequela from an injury that happened 25 years ago, okay? This is how crazy that, sequela is, okay? So let's say, for example, a patient fractured their ankle 25 years ago when they were playing football, okay? And they've had ankle pain ever since then, and they come in 25 years later and they say, doc, my ankle just really hurts, and the doctor says, well, what happened? Nothing, but when I was younger, I did fracture my ankle, and it's been hurting ever since then. I've just had this constant pain. Right there, it's telling you that this pain is related to this injury, okay? So that's an example of sequela. That's when you would code the ankle pain with the ankle fracture with an S at the end because that stands for sequela, okay? Easy as pie, right? Like I said, I will be doing a video individually, so if it doesn't make sense now, that's okay. I will be breaking it down later on, okay? So let's talk about open and closed fractures, okay? There is closed fractures where the skin is completely intact, but the bone is broken, okay? Then there's also open, or AKA compound fractures, and that is when the bone is sticking out of the skin, which happens. But if the documentation does not state that it is open or closed, it is going to be coded as closed, okay? That is the default, okay? If it's not documented as open or closed, you're going to code it as closed, okay? Also, on that same note, if it is not documented as displaced or non-displaced, it is going to be coded as displaced, okay? It's one of those things that you got to kind of watch for, okay? So what is displaced? That means that the bone is broken into 2 or more parts and the bones get displaced from their original position. So basically everything's kind of separated, okay? When you're talking about the fracture, okay? What is non-displaced? So non-displaced means that there is a fracture, but the bone is still aligned. So it's just basically a break. So it's going to depend. How did your provider document it? Is this displaced or is this non-displaced? Okay, so I think it's important to make sure you understand the difference. Okay, and then location. Okay, so you have proximal, which is in our terms here, proximal is anything closest to the body. Okay, so if you're looking at your, just say, let's look at the radius. Okay. If they say proximal, it means this way, okay? This is closest to us. If they say distal radius, it means anything further out, distal, away, okay? If they say anything like in the middle, of course, obviously, it's the middle here or the shaft, okay? So that's the languages of the locations, okay? So keep that in mind. And so then there's subsets of fracture classifications, okay? So there's transverse. So this occurs at the shorter part of the bone rather than, you know, in the middle, long part or whatever. So it's basically across and the shortest part of the bone, okay? That's a transverse fracture. That's what that means. Spiral fracture is basically when the bone, like just like it sounds, when the bone is twisted, it's a spiral. That is a spiral fracture. And this happens a lot with skiers, okay? Don't ask me how, but it does happen a lot with skiers. That's just an example that I saw in one of my researchings. But yes, it does happen a lot with them, okay? Oblique means that it's a break at an angle, okay? And it's normally diagonally, okay? Like a diagonal break, okay? Commuted is when it's broken or shattered into many pieces, okay? So just think of like commute it like that, you know, okay? Segmental is when it's in large fragments, okay? There's also green stick fractures, and this happens with children a lot because their bones are not mature, so they kind of, it's like an incomplete fracture, and basically like the bone bends, okay? Which sounds horribly painful too. All right, so all fractures are always the result of an injury, but then you have stress fractures that are usually the result of overuse or repetitive stress, okay? So there's different types of fractures, okay? And pathological fractures, finally, we're getting to that one. Pathological fractures are due to like underlying disease, and it's not because of physical trauma or impact. It's usually due to like underlying something's going on in the body, be it malignancy or osteoporosis. Those things can cause pathological fractures. Okay, so I tried to make this as like little chunks that you can just take in, you know, because I think it is a lot when you're trying to understand coding for fractures, because a lot of people groan when they talk about fractures. I don't, because I love fractures, but I don't know. I think I'm just weird like that. But yes, so make sure that if you're studying, if you're a student now, make sure that you're taking the time to learn about the different kinds and what they are. There's plenty of pictures online of different types of fractures, so you can basically put in the information to your heart's desire and see what does it mean when you're talking about an oblique fracture, or what does it mean when you're talking about a compound fracture, you know? And if you want to see some really gnarly stuff, look up some open fractures. You know, that's, yeah, that's, just gives me the chills. But yes, that's my video for today. So what did you guys think? Let me know if you have any questions, because there's always plenty of questions when it comes to injury coding. And like I said, that's one of my most favorite subjects is injury coding. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap this one up. So if you guys have any questions, let me know. I am still working on Quiz Friday, which is like already going to be here already. This week went by so fast. So let me know if you guys have any questions. And if you are a medical coder, a medical coding student, somebody curious about the fascinating world of medical coding, a provider or a nurse, I hope you'll like and subscribe and follow me on my journey in medical coding. All right, well, I will see y'all on the next video. Bye.